Looks good. Okay.
Yes.
From the top.
And then the rest is Refuah Shlema.
Okay, this shiur is Le'ili Nishmas Tzvi ben Arya Kohen and Refuah Shlema of Reuven Zissel ben Malka, Ruti Bas Dalia, and Noam ben Yaakov ben Tammy, Yaakov ben Dina. Refuah Shlema. So we're taking off from chapter 2. What we covered is that the Tanya is a deep dive into the inner psyche of a Jew. What makes up his inner world and his ability to serve Hashem with his whole being. We said is predicated on the fact that a Jew has two souls. The interplay between these two souls, when we understand this is the nature of every single Jew, and the nature of those two souls, we'll understand the avodah pnimis, the inner work of a Jew, what's demanded of him, what he's capable of, and so on and so forth. And the psyche of the Jew is made up of a spiritual self, an intellectual identity, emotional and a practical self, the way he behaves and the way he speaks and the way he thinks, and we'll get into all of that. So we mentioned in the last shiur that the one part of the Jew comes from the klipa. It's a soul that derives from a spiritual energy that's associated with klipa, which means more than anything else that it's self-absorbed. Even its spirituality is perfection of self. So although that's true goodness as we mentioned, it's not elokus. So now we have to be introduced to what the Alter Rebbe calls the second soul. So question that is brought up over the generations is, why is he calling this soul the second soul? Isn't this the primary soul? We're about to get introduced to the godly soul. So you'll say, okay, in the first chapter he mentioned there are two souls, and he brings up the first soul as the vitalizing, animal, natural klipa soul. So the only thing left, the second soul, is the godly soul. But then he could have started the opposite. He could have started in the first chapter and mentioned the godly soul and say the second soul is the animal soul. So by calling this the second soul, he's telling us something. So there's two approaches to this thing. The first one is, it says about the Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov, so it gets imposed onto the animal soul and the godly soul as well, that the claim of the animal soul comes first. From the moment a baby starts to move, he's infused with his full animal identity and soul. That's why babies, as beautiful as they are and as lovable as they are, innocent, but every movement that they make is about themselves. Right away, everything belongs to me. Everything goes in my mouth right away. If you get a little baby born to one of your small children, you have a 1-year-old or 2-year-old, and the next baby's born, they took the mother away. That's my mother. It gets a little more sophisticated as time goes on. Every candy in the house for the 2-year-old belongs to him. And even if he took it from you, right? The 2-year-old takes the candy from the 5-year-old, and the 5-year-old takes it back, and the 2-year-old starts screaming, "You took my candy." That's the world of you. The natural tendency of a person is to be self-involved. And in fact, Hashem created us that way. Our whole filter of reality comes through our own consciousness and nothing else. It actually is created and dies to some degree with our own consciousness. We can't fathom the world without us. But that's all the animal perspective. So it is first in a person's consciousness. Only afterwards, at bar mitzvah, bas mitzvah, bar mitzvah, you have the full infusion of the godly soul. And now he's got a lot of catching up to do. So that's why it's called the second soul. On that level, he came second. The other level is he's actually second in importance. It says that the godly soul doesn't need to come, the Jewish soul, the holiness, doesn't need to come into the world for its own self. It's already perfect. What's it coming in the world for? It comes to rectify. So it's secondary. It has a mission, which is to first and foremost rectify the animal soul, the animal identity, which we all have, which starts for the first 12 and 13 years growing in self-absorption, again, even in refined ways, is to be overtaken by the godly soul, the godly identity. overtaken in a positive way, influenced and transformed, and making something that was otherwise other and opposite and distinct from Hashem's reality into a more unified and holy reality. That's why he's called the second soul, because he's not the main focus of what's going on over here. He comes in for a mission. He is the first thing is the animal soul. So the second soul is the godly soul. So let's find out about the godly soul. The next few chapters are going to introduce us to the essence of the godly soul and the character of the godly soul. Okay, and then we'll go back to the animal soul and talk about its. We already talked about its essence, and we'll talk about its character, and we'll go on from there. So Perek Beis, the Nefesh Hashenis BeYisrael Hi. I feel like a drum roll on this line here. And the second soul in a Jew is Chelek Elaka Mimal Mamish. Is a piece. I'm going to translate first literally, and then I'll tell you what it means. It was a piece of a God above literally. Now simply, it's a piece of godliness above. You can't have a piece of God. You can have a piece of godliness. And we have to get into that a little bit. And why is it called a piece in the first place? What is above? What's mamish? Why are we calling it godly? So this is the second soul, and this chapter is going to describe its essence of how it is godly. This terminology actually comes from a pasuk. There's a pasuk in Job, in Eiv, that says, Chelek Elaka Mimal. Now Eiv is actually not talking about his soul. He's saying, like I'm going to give you a chelek. This is a semi-common language. I'll give you a piece of my mind. This is my piece from above. This is my portion. It's not so great. He's not using it in the most positive way, Job. But the Kabbalists, the Mukubalim, and others took this language and said it's talking about the Jewish neshama. The neshama is a chelek elaka mimal. It's a piece. That's a quote from the verse, and it's a piece of godliness. It's a shtik elokus, a piece of godliness. The Alter Rebbe added a word though. The pasuk doesn't say mamish, and the Alter Rebbe added the word mamish. So you should know that it doesn't mean, it's not just some to denote some sort of just special relationship. We're the chosen people, so we're like a piece of God. No, it's actually mamish. It's literally a godly core, literally a piece of godliness. And the other interpretation of mamish is, the word mamish means, it's literal, but it means mamoshus. Mamoshus means substance. To tell you that the godly soul is not just something that's elusive from us, it can actually, even though it's the highest of the high, mimal, it's a piece of elokus, it can permeate the most coarse and substantive parts of our identity. Okay? Even in our lowest self, we can find the ability to reveal the highest godly power. So let's try and get into a little bit what this is, but first we'll preface by talking about elokus. There's elokah and there's elokus. There's Hashem himself and there's godliness. So godliness is described in some way, or analogous to in some way, not like a soul to a body. A body is something that a soul inhabits and enlivens, infuses its vitality in. But at some point, after 120 years, the soul, which is eternal, sheds the body, and that soul, which had all of its energies and so on infused into the body, continues, but the body disappears. But then there are parts of the soul that are actually soul parts, not body parts. Like a soul, the essence of the soul is not its ability to think and not its ability to speak, but it has both of those powers. They're different powers. By the way, does a body speak or does a soul speak? So the body in that regard is very similar to an axe, or in the modern political discussions, a gun. Right? They say guns don't, this is at least on one side of the debate, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Right? So it's not the axe that chops the wood, it's me holding the axe that chops the wood. Nobody would think that it's the bulldozer that built the house. It's the contractor and his men who were able to build the house. They get all the accolades. Nobody goes to the bulldozer and say you did a fine job. Although I'm sure some bulldozers are better than others. But the body is like that. The body doesn't speak. When a person after 120 passes away, his body, at least in the first moments, is completely whole the way it was a moment earlier. But it still can't speak, it can't see, it can't hear, it can't feel. Okay? Because all of that belonged to the life force that infused the body. The body is only like the axe or like the gun. It's the vessel with which the soul, the relationship is much deeper because it infuses the body and enlivens every aspect of the body. But it's analogous to the vessel, the axe, which the soul uses, the soul power uses the lips to be able to speak and the vocal cords to be able to speak and the nose to smell and so on and so forth. So the soul has, however, powers those are the powers of the soul that go with it. So the soul is speaking, but a soul is a spiritual entity. It doesn't actually, you can't cut it up, and it doesn't take up space. We can see its effect on a body. When it leaves the body, where is it? Okay, it doesn't take up space. It's eternal. It's some spiritual energy. It defies space and time. So spiritual, it's hard to talk about the parts of spirituality. It's clear that the soul, which is spiritual and whole, has these powers. How do I know it has the powers? Because when it invests itself in a body, all of a sudden the body can speak, and the body can. If certain souls, like the soul of a dog, does not have complex intellect. When it comes into its body, you can't have the dog all of a sudden sitting in the Tanya shiur. You can, but he's probably protecting somebody else. So there's a certain ability in a soul that it fits in the body and infuses the body and brings out that power. But the soul itself, on the one hand, is one simple entity, which has no measurement, no weight, and no parts to it. When it comes into the body, we see that it actually has those parts. Why is that important for the moment? Because we're using it as an analogy to understand what godliness means. So we are a piece of Hashem's godliness, not his very self. What is godliness? Like the soul power, speech and action is to the soul. Godliness is to God himself, Hashem himself. So my soul powers are certainly not anything other than soul powers. They're not other. You can't call them other to my identity, but they're not the essence of who I am. Is that clear? There's the essence and the powers. The powers flow out of the essence. But the powers themselves are not the essence. So Elokus, so to speak, flows out of Hashem, but it's not the essence of Hashem. So we are called Chelek Eloka Mimal Mamish. We are literally have the flowing out of godliness, of direct godliness, is the vitality and the soul, and the essential soul, the godly soul of every single Jew. Now the Alter Rebbe wants to actually explain an analogy, a few analogies for how that works. Okay, so we're holding on the second line of Perek Beis. Kamoshe Kosuv, Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chaim, v'atem nafachta bi. So there's a few psukim. There's a pasuk one's a pasuk, one's a bracha. The pasuk says about Adam Rishon that, unique to all of creation, Hashem blew a living soul into his nostrils. He blew into him life. Everything else was created by, it says, B'devar havaya shamayim naisu, with the word of Hashem, the heavens were made, and it says, B'asara ma'amaris nivra ilam, and the world was created with 10 utterances. So all the psukim in the beginning of Bereshis, there's 10 psukim that mention how Hashem spoke and this came into being. Hashem spoke and this came into being. There's 10 speeches and utterances with which the world was created. It says about a Jew, Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chaim. blew into him a living soul. What is the analogy of blowing? Says the Zohar, and we also say V'ata nafachta bi when we get up in the morning. You blew into me a living soul. The Zohar explains Man de nafach mitoiche nafach. Pirush mitoiche yusei mipnei yusei. That a person who when one blows, he blows from his inner self. So the Alter Rebbe explains that from his innermost essence of himself. That a person, when he blows, so there's two things about blowing. One is, you literally have to dig deep. You take a big inhale, and you blow out from very deep inside of yourself. So Dibur also uses, speech also uses air, uses breath. But it doesn't go so deep. And also, when you blow out all of you go way inside, deeper, and you blow out all of your air, until you need to breathe again. You can't exist with it. You took your whole self out in the blow. When you're speaking, you don't do that. You let out much. You don't dig so deep, and you don't let out so much. You can continue to talk. Trust me, for hours and hours and hours without losing your breath. Okay, you take small breaths. So this is analogous to, this is what the Torah is saying about a Jewish soul. It's a difference between blowing and speech, the way breathing is. So Hashem literally blew from inside of himself, inner pnimius chayas, inner essential vitality, like when a person blows. That's the analogy. Along the same lines, kach haderech mashul neshama Yisrael alu b'machshava. Similar to this, it comes from a medrash. It says the souls of the Jews arose in thought, Hashem's thought. Again, about creation, it says speech. All of creation is through speech. It says, the Medrash says uniquely about the Jew, he arose in thought. Kedichsiv. Oh, that's the next piece. What's the idea of thought as opposed to speech? Firstly, thought is the pnimius of speech. That a person, except for my kids, a person can't speak without thinking first. Okay, we can all speak without thinking first, like I just did about making fun of my kids on a video. But you cannot say something without having thought it first. Even Ashrei, which is Chatai Aski Rayim, you could say Ashrei without thinking about it too much. But you had to have thought about it once, at least, or many times, to be able to say it without thinking about it now. Thought is pnimius and the inner vitality of everything that we say. But it's more than that. The relationship with thought to one's soul is much more pnimi than the relationship of speech to one's soul. Thought, number one, is between me and myself. Speech is between me and another person. I speak primarily, the essence of speech is for me to be able to share something about my experience with another person. But not only that, even when I'm talking about experiencing something very deep in my life, so there's the way that I experienced it, the emotion that I went through, and the experience I had appeared to me in my thought. I don't have to explain it to myself. It's an awareness. The awareness in my mind it's the thought that I have is so deeply connected with my inner self that I become aware of it, and it could be overwhelming. Now I want to explain it to you. So it's very external. It's not superficial. You have some way of empathizing and getting in touch with the experience that I had. But the words are poor compared to the way that thought experiences it. So again, the analogy of Yisrael alu b'machshava, that the Jews arose in thought, is an expression of the deepness of how they come from we're trying to give an analogy for chedek elokam u'mal mamish, that a Jewish soul is a piece of Hashem, a piece of godliness, literally merely from the inner aspect and not from something external. So very similar to this, we say, and here's the real, the rest of the chapter revolves around this analogy. And we're gonna use modern terminology to try and bring it closer to home. Kedichsiv, like it says, B'ni b'cheir Yisrael, Banim atem l'Hashem lekechem. It says in verses, my firstborn child Yisrael, that the Jew is called the son of Hashem. Banim atem l'Hashem lekechem. You are sons, the verse says, to Hashem lekechem. Pirush, k'moisha ben. Now I'm going to stop there for a second. It's in the middle of a verse, middle of a sentence. Like a son. I was thinking in some of these classes, you see online, a lot of people get a lot of views when you give an interesting title. So I was thinking this class has to be called The Real Son of God. But then I thought, like, if you put that up there, you can get really crazy. You might, but we can get hundreds of thousands of views like that. Or I was maybe The Real Sons of God. I don't know. But that's what the Torah says. The Torah says that in this regard, the Christians had one thing right. They called him the Son of God, but the truth is, it's because he's a Jew. Every Jew is the Son of God. It stops there. They got nothing right after that. So what does it mean? This is what the Alter Rebbe is saying. The Torah is saying something extremely deep about who a Jew is by likening him to a son. Atem, it says, Atem banim atem l'Hashem lekechem. You are sons of Hashem, your God. So it says, for example, what it means is like a son. Shaben nimshach mimoech ha'av, Kach keviyachol nimshal kol ish Yisrael. Nimshach nishmas kol Yisrael nimshacha machshavti v'chachmasei yisbarich. So just like a son derives from the brain of his father, so too every single Jewish soul derives from the thought and the wisdom of Hashem Yisbarich. So that's a very loaded statement. First of all, what does it mean that a son is drawn from the brain of his father? Later, he's going to call it tipas me'cha'av. He's going to call it a drop that comes from the brain. Now, if the physical drop which creates humans came from one's brain, that would be damaging after a while to have children, right? It's obviously not a physical drop that comes from the brain, but the brain is responsible for everything in the body and producing everything in the body, and it produces seed in the human constantly. So the brain is the process of the brain is producing the seed. So the seed in that sense comes from the brain, number one. Number two, it's much deeper than that. The whole person is enveloped inside of his brain. So, and the seat of the soul, like all the powers that we said, the power of speech and the power of thought, power of mobility, doesn't belong to the body. A dead body can't do any of those things. It belongs to the soul. Where does it first show up? In the brain. So there's a seed in a male that actually holds brain power. Just like the brain holds the entire person, every aspect of him. How he looks, his emotional, the nature part of him all, and even the nurture. So some of it gets imprinted inside of his psyche. It's all recorded in the brain. Every limb is inside of the brain. And the same is true about that drop. That drop holds the entire person. Unlike when you want to talk to somebody, you can give over ideas to somebody, but you can't give him the power to understand those ideas. When you have a child, you give him the full structure of humanity. So just like my brain encompasses every aspect of my being, the seed that one passes on to his child, that forms his child, is just like a drop of the brain. It holds on, encompassing the entire father, and that itself, after fertilizing an egg and 9 months and so on, which we'll talk about more, becomes the next generation. The next generation is literally a mini-me of the father. In today's terminology, it's a lot easier and we'll keep using this analogy throughout this chapter, to relate to this idea in terms of a clone. Now, we don't clone humans. I'm not so sure that how far we are, how close, but we've cloned sophisticated animals and mammals and so on. The idea of cloning is that you take this is physically essential to an animal or a person. That there's a drop that holds the code of the human being, and with that drop, I can literally make a mini version of the same human being. He will sound similar, look similar, much more than father and son, much more than brothers, and even more than twins, who have the closest DNA makeup that you can have. It's going to be a replica of the host, we call him a father, or whatever you call him. But he's going to go through his own experiences. So obviously, he's not going to be exactly the same. He may never actualize because of the opportunities that he has, the potential that the father has. He may do much better, okay? But this is a very similar analogy to what we're using over here. Where the Torah, if it would have said, you're a clone of Hashem, we wouldn't have known what clones are yet. But we know what a child is. And the way that a child works is literally the same kind of process of cloning. You take a piece of the essence of the physical and it holds the spiritual makeup of the person as well, and it's transferred into the next generation. So the essence of the child is the essence of the father, but unlike we talked about before, elokus, or soul power, if my intellect is a soul power and my speech is a power to speak is a soul power, so too the godly soul is from the extension of godliness. However, there's a distinction between powers to the soul and a Jew to Hashem, and that is yatzu v'nifradu. A soul actually becomes detached from its source. So the analogy of a child becomes extremely powerful, or a clone. That the essence of the father is inside of the son, or the essence of the clone is inside of where the cell, the DNA of the original human. Okay, it's the same exact physical essence, but he's walking around having his own experience. And he could actually tap into his essence or not. And by the way, if you tap into your essence physically, so you cannot, not only can you clone yourself, you can fix every part of yourself. If you get to this idea of stem cells, if you get to the essence core of your own DNA, so your whole physical self can be healed, that's the theory. Right? You don't need, a person doesn't need heart transplants, so he can make his own heart or regenerate his heart from stem cells and so on and so forth. So every Jew has the godly core. He has his ability to be separate, walk through his own experience, and never realize his godliness. But the truth of his innermost identity is exactly that of where he came from. He's a mini-me, or a clone of Hashem. And once he realizes his godly essence, he can transform his whole self. And now we're going to go from here, we're going to get deeper into this DNA or father-son analogy, and then get into the character, how it works in intellect and emotion and so on, and go there from there to the animal soul. I have no idea how we're doing on time.
Just check. Yeah, that's it.
That's it. I'll just leave you with this. We said it's a statement from the Zohar that a Jew derives from the Chochmah of Hashem. Okay, so the Medrash says we come from his thought. The Zohar will say we come from his wisdom, like another kind of brain-like power, and that's the analogy of the sun. Okay, we want the next year we're gonna connect the fact that we come from Hashem's wisdom and brain, which are soul powers, which are actually powers and not the essence of Hashem, to being connected to the Jewish soul is also connected to the essence of Hashem. And if this sounded complex, I have to tell you, the side note, which I think we're going to deal with next time, is it's on the side because it's Kabbalistic and not in the main text. But I think we'll give it a full treating next time. It has to do with the Maharal and the Rambam and the Arizal and how they all fit together in their understanding of Hashem's qualities.
Excellent. Thank you.
As a
Just press that button.